two. One, two, three. Me and all my friends, we're all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing, and there's no way we ever could. Now we see everything that's going wrong with the world and those who lead it. We just feel like we don't have the means to rise above and beat it. So we keep waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. It's hard to beat the system when you're standing at a distance. So we keep waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. Now if we had the power to bring our neighbors home from war, they would have never missed a Christmas. No more ribbons on their door. When you trust your television, what you get is what you got. Cause when they own the information, oh, they can bend it all they want. That's why we're waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. It's not that we don't care, we just know the fight ain't fair. So we keep waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. And we're still waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. One day our generation is gonna rule the population. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. We keep on waiting, waiting, waiting on the world to change. Waiting on the world to change.
Welcome to the Beau Show. Hopefully many of you will know this very famous song by John Mayer. I saw him in concert recently and he was terrific. And as I listened to this song recently, I hadn't thought much about the lyrics. But John Mayer's lyrics are always quite poignant, so I will repeat these specific lines. Now we see everything that's going wrong with the world and those who lead it. We just feel like we don't have the means to rise above and beat it. So right here, Mayer is saying that his generation is thought to stand for nothing, but yet even if they see something wrong with the world, they don't feel that they have the means to change it. So in this respect, they have to keep waiting on the world to change rather than changing it themselves. And then he sings the following: it's hard to beat the system when we're standing at a distance. In verse 2 he sings, now if we had the power to bring our neighbors home from war, they would have never missed a Christmas, no more ribbons on their door. And when you trust your television, what you get is what you got. Because when they own the information, oh, they can bend it all they want. Now to me, that just cuts right to the core of what's happening in our culture and society today. When they own the information, they can bend it all they want. Think about your major mainstream media outlets, what they cover and how they cover it. And Mayer sings, it's not that we don't care, we just know the fight ain't fair. So we keep on waiting on the world to change. And finally, in his last stanza, he sings, one day our generation is gonna rule the population. So we keep on waiting on the world to change. Now, I really think Mayer hit on some very poignant themes in this song. And as you know, art imitates life, and then sometimes life imitates art. He released this song in 2006, and the music video depicts him walking near the Brooklyn Bridge in New York while a series of graffiti artists paint various murals on private edifices. Words like think, wake up, and exploited are painted on these edifices, with some using an assault-style gun as one of the letters. In an interview with the Daily Mail in 2007, Mayer said, quote, I wanted to start a debate. Most of us are happy to wait for things to change, unquote. Around that time, 2006 or so, is when the Iraq War was happening. So that is where he probably references bringing neighbors home from war, as well as his criticism of the media, which can bend information. As we look back on the Iraq War, it does seem unnecessary in hindsight, especially considering the intelligence at that time and the unfortunate and unnecessary loss of American soldiers' lives. You may remember Donald Trump's criticism of George W. Bush and the Iraq War. But of course, the vast majority of Congress voted to invade, based upon intelligence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, as the U.S. tried to exact vengeance for the September 11th terrorist attacks. And so Saddam became an easy target. Of course, also in hindsight was recognizing the concept of nation building, which aims to topple an authoritarian regime to replace it with one more friendly to the West or the United States. We saw how long it took for Iraq to become even a moderately functioning democracy. And even to this day, the words mission accomplished and any celebration of Iraq seems absurd, as ISIS, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, clearly formed and fomented in Iraq post 9/11. The same is true of the Taliban, where after we got bin Laden and tried to make Afghanistan functional, it recently became Taliban controlled again after a sloppy and costly withdrawal. You may even recall historically that America assisted Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan when Russia was a threat. Billy Joel references this in his song "We Didn't Start the Fire" by singing "Ayatollahs in Iran, Russians in Afghanistan," in another very world events conscious song. So Mayer makes the point that if his generation had the power or choice, they would bring those soldiers home from war. And while I don't consider this song activist per se, as some can be, it's almost more pacifist. Not pacifist or peace-seeking, but passivist, meaning everyone is waiting on the world to change because there's not much that can be done. However, you could say that Mayer is simply observing that because we are waiting, we should do something rather than be passive, because waiting won't do us much good. Perhaps that's the message in those murals in the music video, charging people to wake up. There's no question that there's a sort of helplessness in the song, even though he warns that his generation will one day rule the population. Maybe Mayer thinks that in spite of his misunderstood friends and generation, that most people kind of live in oblivion because either they don't have the will or the knowledge to change things. And I do think that's true. And it was true both in 2006 when he wrote it to start the debate, as he indicates, and in 2022. The issue to me is that there have been waves and waves of activism, usually to help the cause of the left. Things like Antifa, BLM, climate, and now the Roe v. Wade protest. In these activists' minds, they are not going to wait for the world to change. They're going to try to change it themselves by doing radical things, whether that's setting buildings on fire, looting, or trying to intimidate Supreme Court justices or lawmakers like Rand Paul. Oh, and speaking of Rand Paul, he tried to hold up the latest round of $40 billion in funding for Ukraine because he said that his oath was to the American Constitution. Take a listen.
Reserving the right to object, my oath of office is to the U.S. Constitution, not to any foreign nation, and no matter how sympathetic the cause, my oath of office is to the national security of the United States of America. We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. In March, inflation hit a 40-year high. Gasoline alone is up 48%, and energy prices are up 32% over the last year. Food prices have increased by nearly 9%. Used vehicle prices are up 35% for the year, and new vehicle prices have increased 12% or more. Yes, inflation doesn't just come out of nowhere, it comes from deficit spending.
The senator is one of the few that is not caught up in the peer pressure of the moment. It is hard to justify $40 billion in aid for Ukraine to Americans who have a hard time filling up their gas tank, buying basic goods, or getting baby formula, when our hard-earned tax dollars are going to a faraway country that has been perpetually corrupt. That is not to say that Ukraine doesn't need help. But to what extent do we as Americans have to participate in a regional conflict that we could have avoided largely by producing our own energy? So when John Mayer sings, "Now we see everything that's going wrong with the world and those who lead it," well, Joe Biden is highly compromised in this current Russia-Ukraine war. Mayer might have been rightly looking at George W. Bush at the time in the Iraq War without naming him, but you cannot help but look at Joe Biden and see that his involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war is in part a result of bad leadership and shady business dealings with both countries, especially his son Hunter, and how that laptop compromised him. 10% for the big guy? Who did we think he was referring to? Shaquille O'Neal? And I think Mayer's line about the television media is perhaps my favorite, because he hits the nail right on the head. When you trust your television, what you get is what you got. Because when they own the information, they can bend it all they want. Think about the concept of owning information. This is right at the heart of Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, which is actually now on hold. He recognized that Twitter had become not a source of vital information and debate, but rather a one-sided, biased censorship and spin machine. Suppressing the New York Post in that Hunter Biden story changed how our democracy worked, because it suppressed important information about a candidate's son, and by virtue of his business dealings, the candidate himself. The TV media and pundits didn't talk about it. It was verboten. And now that the DHS is initializing a disinformation governance board led by someone who has extreme partisan bias, you can see how information can actually be owned.